freedom of expression in America put to the test, which is ironic since Charlie Kirk, whose killing has sparked a Trumpian crackdown, called himself a free speech advocate.
Today we witness in real time how the promise of never again is broken.
The list grows longer. The United Nations adds its name to those calling Israel's assault on Gaza a genocide. And voices from across the divide. The effect the new Trump administration has had on the war between Russia and Ukraine. It's been just over a week now since the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And in death, as he was in life, the far-right podcaster and MAGA influencer is proving divisive. While Kirk's supporters mourned his death, many Americans chose that moment to critique him and what he represented. Such expressions can be controversial, but they do fall under the protections of the U.S. Constitution, just not apparently in Donald Trump's America. His administration has clamped down on what it deems to be hate speech emanating from the left, a crackdown that has already cost journalists, academics, even a comedian their jobs. Meanwhile, multiple MAGA voices have rushed to blame left-wing radicalism for Kirk's murder. That is a story unto itself. But at the time of this recording, there is just too much speculation out there on the killer's motives and not enough proof. So we will leave the drawing of conclusions on that to others. What we do know, far-right leaders from D.C. to London to Tel Aviv have all seized on Kirk's death, weaponizing his polarizing legacy for their own political purposes, even if that means dialing up the temperature in what is a volatile time in America. Turning up the heat. The assassination of Charlie Kirk is a story that, at its core, is about political violence, polarization, and the burgeoning importance of podcasts in American politics. The victim made his name, for the most part, through podcasts. Both the FBI director in charge of the murder investigation, Kash Patel, and his deputy, Dan Bongino, did the same.
This is the Charlie Kirk Show.
And right after Kirk's killing, Vice President J.D. Vance paid tribute to him by guest hosting his podcast, sending a clear message to Kirk's audience.
We need to grieve, but we also need this courage in this moment more than we've ever needed it.
Charlie Kirk was very influential, particularly among young conservatives, where it signaled the value that this administration placed on that show, and the host and his role in connecting them to a number of people.
We call the shots, not the media, not the oligarchs, not Washington, D.C.
Charlie Kirk was a get-out-the-vote machine. And the administration's response to Kirk's death has been oriented towards the fact that he was so important, not just at a media level, but at an organizational level for the Republican electoral process.
Charlie Kirk initially did that through Turning Point USA, a conservative political movement he founded in 2012, when he was just 18.
Absolutely. I mean, we're starting chapters nationwide with Turning Point USA.
In 2020, he took to podcasting through Turning Points Live, targeting young Republicans. Kirk racked up huge numbers while attracting reams of criticism from the left over the content he was churning out on the stories of the day.
I mean, Joe Biden is a bumbling, dementia-filled Alzheimer's corrupt tyrant who should honestly be put in prison. And
often, Kirk railed against the cancel culture he blamed liberals for inflicting on the U.S. media space, defending the right to free speech, even when it was hateful.
The cancel culture never comes from a mass amount of people. It's always a small, angry, venomous kind of just group of keyboard warriors.
So what would Charlie Kirk make of the canceling now coming from the other side? The Trump administration and its followers going after Americans, journalists, academics, getting them fired, threatening them with arrest for daring to question Kirk's track record posthumously.
We will absolutely target you, go after you, if you are targeting anyone with hate speech.
And what would he make of a news organization like the Washington Post capitulating and firing its only black columnist, Karen Attiah?
when we look at these firings, and I think we should understand them as purgings, Karen Attiah at the Washington Post, the language that she used to describe the killing of Charlie Kirk, she says she's not going to mourn it. That's her right. And then she did a little bit of sort of media criticism at the performance of almost enforced grief happening right now. And for that, she was fired.
For people who do not want to see a diversity of reactions around Charlie Kirk's death, the firing of that journalist was its own cause for celebration. Charlie Kirk said many cruel things about women, and he seemed to have a particular level of ire against Black women who he saw as beneficiaries of diversity initiatives.
You had to go steal a white person's slot to go be taken somewhat seriously.
And if you're a Black woman in America, the massive mourning over his death brought up a lot of rage.
This honestly should not come as a surprise to anyone who's been paying attention to the U.S. media ecosystem. The Washington Post was purchased several years ago by Jeff Bezos, and while Bezos initially said that he wasn't going to have editorial influence, he later said that the paper would emphasize personal liberties and free markets. So we have seen a change in the Washington Post's editorial direction in terms of what it allows and really what it amplifies.
There's only a certain amount of stupidity that American discourse will tolerate, and using a free speech activist's death to crack down on speech may in fact cross the threshold of American discursive stupidity.
Not that the discourse surrounding Kirk's killing is limited to the U.S. Last weekend in London, Kirk was lionized at a huge right-wing anti-immigration protest. Far-right leaders in France, Germany, the Netherlands all reacted to Kirk's killing, blaming the left for what Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán called an international hate campaign. But the first foreign leader to appear on the U.S. airwaves on the topic was Benjamin Netanyahu.
He wrote me a letter on May 2nd this year. He said, "One of my greatest joys as a Christian is advocating for Israel and forming alliances to defend Judeo-Christian civilization."
The part Netanyahu left out was Kirk's view of America's unrelenting support for Israel had turned, and as a result, he came under pressure from Israel's backers to toe the line.
I have text messages, Megan, calling me an anti-Semite.
We know that over time, Kirk had moved away from the position of supporting Israel specifically in its assault on Gaza and the Palestinian genocide. So it's interesting that Netanyahu would pick up on some old comments that Kirk had made and try to spin them into support for not only the state of Israel, but also for Benjamin Netanyahu himself.
So first, let me say Charlie Kirk was a tremendous friend of Israel.
We see another opportunist in a political office just taking advantage of a crisis to really amplify his own message.
It is so important that Israel maintains strong support, not only from the White House, but from the American people. And the young left is just absolutely devastated by this war and very, very, very opposed to it. And increasingly, the young right was having problems with this war and starting also to criticize it. And so getting the right wing and the social media influencers on the side of Israel is going to be very important for Netanyahu and for Israel. And Netanyahu knows that.
Netanyahu, like Trump, has a certain political acumen. So Netanyahu understands that he has to get in line, say the right things about Kirk. And, it's not just public statements. Look at the news coverage. There are pictures of Kirk being projected onto the sides of buildings in Tel Aviv to make sure that the government is identifying itself with Kirk and consolidating its support among Kirk's followers.
Donald Trump is using this moment to settle some scores as well. When asked by a reporter for ABC News, a network that has already succumbed to legal pressure from Trump, how his Attorney General Pam Bondi can target hate speech when so many Republicans call it free speech, like Charlie Kirk did, he chose to threaten the reporter.
He'll probably go after people like you because you treat me so unfairly. It's hate. You have a lot of hate in your heart. Maybe they'll come after ABC.
24 hours later, ABC pulled its late-night comedy host, Jimmy Kimmel, off the air indefinitely for mocking the president's reaction to Kirk's murder.
This is not how an adult grieves the murder of someone he called a friend. This is how...
Donald Trump's formula: intimidation verging on authoritarianism, mixed with elements of distraction. Trump has good reason to divert Americans away from other issues. Everything from a faltering economy to the specter of the Epstein files, the existential threat they could pose to his presidency should they be made public.
I disagree with the argument that the mobilization of grief is an attempt to distract America from the real issues. They are sincere in their authoritarianism. It's not a put-on. MAGA already is using this event as a catalyst for a rapid expansion of power. And I want us, as journalists, to turn our attention to resisting that expansion of power.
But the American media is not also really set up to cover extremism, so that's another problem. And a lot of people inside American journalism are trying to figure out ways to better share what's going on, but it's not easy. If you think that we are in perilous times here and the people are scared, you're getting the right impression. There's a tremendous amount of fear right now.
This week, as the UN formally declared what Palestinians have been saying for so long, that Israel is committing a genocide, Israeli forces launched the invasion to seize Gaza City. Israeli cabinet ministers aren't even bothering to hide their intention to raze the city to the ground and empty it of its people. Ryan Kohls is here with more.
Israel's response to the charge of genocide has at this point become rather predictable, even formulaic. It says the UN is advancing Hamas propaganda, a charge UN officials are pretty dismissive of.
Honestly, the Israeli responses are becoming so boring. You know, they say the same thing every time. They're producing the responses by ChatGPT these days, and they spend so much money in the foreign ministry on propaganda. You'd think that they would actually come up with something original.
And just as Israeli leaders try to deny they are committing genocide, they also keep offering up more evidence of their own genocidal intent. Throughout the past 2 years, a noticeable pattern has emerged. When speaking in English to Western media, Israeli officials have been careful, choosing to use moderate language. But when speaking in Hebrew, the mask falls off. This week, Defense Minister Israel Katz shared this video celebrating the destruction of a university in Gaza. Institutions like these are protected under international humanitarian law, but he called it a source of incitement and terror. Minister for National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir also shared videos of Israel's systematic destruction of buildings in Gaza City, boasting that Israel is pressing ahead with, quote, all our might. Knesset member Itzhak Kreuzer went further, branding Palestinians as Nazis and stating that there is no other way but to destroy and eliminate them. These calls for the erasure of Palestinian people, their homes, and institutions leave little doubt about Israel's goal, the annihilation of Palestinian existence. The UN Genocide Convention has two elements to identify a genocide: intention and execution. Intention can be harder to prove, but Israeli officials have repeatedly made it easy through their own words. And with Palestinians live streaming the death and destruction around them, there is no doubt about the extent of the execution of genocide in Gaza.
Thanks, Ryan. Turning now to another war zone and the effect the Trump administration is having on the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Trump's second term in office has injected plenty of unpredictability into the mix, unsettling Kiev, allowing Moscow more room for maneuver, and forcing the media on both sides to recalibrate. The Trump effect has also provided the Russian military with a boost, while Ukraine is struggling on two fronts, military and diplomatic. The support it gets from its allies. To get a better feel for where this story is at and where it's going, we spoke with a Russian journalist in exile and a Ukrainian media scholar. Now, many Ukrainians we tried to interview declined to share screen space with a Russian, but the two voices you will hear have consented to appear together. They unpack how the media in Ukraine and Russia are grappling with Trump, the war he claims to be mediating, plus what Ukrainians and Russians are expecting, even dreading, will happen next.
Propaganda has always been a crucial weapon for Putin, a cornerstone for his authority, and of course even more so since the invasion of Ukraine in February 2022.
Владимир Путин на Петербургском форуме, как мы слышали, подчеркнул очевидное: мы же один народ с украинцами, поэтому если смотреть с точки зрения нашего исторического единства, вся Украина наша.
The return of Donald Trump to the White House has forced Russian propaganda machine to adapt, to make changes to the standard narrative, when the usual picture was that it is the evil West which is trying to ruin and destroy Russia. And this image had to be altered to accommodate a figure like Trump.
Трамп представляет вот этот мир реалий, мир ощущений, который базируется в том числе и на простых традиционных ценностях.
Donald Trump has been quite a disrupting presence. Before he was re-elected, he had really emphasized the prospects for peace.
I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine totally settled. I'll have it done in 24 hours.
Ukrainian media were quite optimistic about Trump. Every small tweet of his was reported, his inauguration became a real media event. But 9 months have passed, and what we see now is fatigue. Trump bombards the world with his social media posts and his random statements, but very little has actually moved.
A wave of Russian drones and missiles
The attacks came despite Donald Trump this very week imposing a new deadline.
Even as the Trump administration looks to move the peace process forward.
No mention of a ceasefire or severe sanctions.
We cover this war and Russia from the outside, but for us it's obvious, it's clear that Putin and the Kremlin have learned how to deal with Trump and his unpredictability. A simple rule that they have adopted is never criticize Trump. I would say that they have learned this rule fully after the NATO summit in June, when Trump found himself quite receptive to some of the European proposals and started to criticize Putin.
Why have you not been able to end the Ukraine war?
Because it's more difficult than people would have any idea. Vladimir Putin has been more difficult.
Russian media reacted quite angrily, which we know that doesn't help Russia's case in Washington.
Поговорить о том, как проходит саммит НАТО в Гааге. Проходит он, правда, пока, ну так, тухловатенько, я бы сказал.
So, since then, instead of counterattacking Trump when Trump attacks Putin, Russian propaganda machine came out with a different solution. Whenever Trump says something inconvenient about Putin or Russia, Russian mainstream media would simply cut out any reference to Putin. For example, Trump would often post something online about Russia-Ukraine war, and in these posts he would often criticize both Zelensky and Putin, as he often does, but only the quote about Zelensky would make its way to Russian news, and Russian propaganda would highlight it, would embrace it, would repeat it, but the stuff about Putin won't be referred to, it will be simply censored. Ultimately, the major propaganda message at home in Russia is that there are two peacemakers who actually really want to end this conflict, and those two men of peace are Putin and Trump. When Putin and Trump met in Alaska in August, Russian media was full of joy and pride.
Уровень приема фантастический. Но я просто реально не могу вспомнить, когда американский президент не только был с ковровой красной дорожкой, но и лично встречал у трапа.
The main message was that Putin cannot and never will be isolated, celebrating the fact that all attempts to isolate Putin have failed, with a natural triumphal follow-up later in September in China.
Рука об руку, глаза в глаза. Что за принципы глобального управления обсуждают в Китае дракон, слон и медведь?
Putin's goal in his game with Trump is clear. He already learned, he already knows that he cannot recruit Trump and flip him over and have him as his full-scale loyal ally. But he can learn how to master Trump and how to outplay Trump. He can take advantage of the lack of expertise on Ukraine in Trump's team and persuade him in legitimacy of his demands. Ultimately, the major victory for Putin politically and in terms of optics and propaganda is that he deals with Trump as his peer. And Russian media really pushes that. Putin and Trump are new Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin of our times. They reshape the world and they decide the future of Ukraine and the future of Europe, for that matter. That's the story that Russian media keeps pushing.
Ukrainian journalists have had to find a way to understand and report on someone like Donald Trump. He's an unpredictable man, someone who talks big but doesn't deliver that much, and most importantly, someone who doesn't really understand the true nature of the war Ukraine has been fighting.
You know, Ukraine is being just wiped out. Look at what's happening to the cities. There are cities, there's not even a building standing.
Undeniably, the most shocking political and media moment between Trump and Zelensky happened at the meeting at the Oval Office in February 2022.
It's an honor to have President Zelensky.
The whole thing began quite normally and then it just exploded.
No, you've done a lot of talking.
First journalists that covered it didn't know how to react, so there was a lot of shock, even confusion.
I don't think you'd be a tough guy without the United States. You're either going to make a deal or we're out.
Once the surprise had worn off, there was a lot of anger. Many Ukrainian journalists felt that the victim of the war was being scolded and made look ungrateful.
If you didn't have our military equipment.
There are many people in Ukraine, including many journalists, who have their criticisms of Zelensky. But what happened with Trump really made people think. It was a moment when we realized how vulnerable we are right now.
Мають усвідомити, що мова йде не про персонально Зеленського, що мова йде про атаку на інституцію і про атаку на українську державність.
All the anger online was contrasted to some extent with the realization in Ukraine's mainstream media. Trump often lashes out at any criticism. Anything could spark a backlash. So after the initial shock, television coverage soon became more careful.
Отже, кадри, які безперечно увійдуть в історію, суперечка президентів в Білому домі.
Of course, here in Ukraine, we aren't just watching how Trump deals with our leaders, but also with others, especially Putin and Russia. And what we saw in Alaska was just a confirmation of what we were anxious about.
Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
Mainstream outlets, the big Ukrainian television channels, attempted to provide a reserved, neutral coverage, but you could still sense the bitterness, especially when the red carpet was rolled out for Putin, but also the warm handshake, the pat on the shoulder. Those were small gestures, but they generated a lot of attention and a lot of criticism here in Ukraine.
Усіма своїми жестами демонстрував, що він хоче з ізоляції витягнути Путіна, що терориста він хоче зробити своїм другом.
The follow-up meeting with Zelensky and the European leaders helped calm some nerves. There were no clashes and it almost felt uneventful, especially compared to the awful meeting in the Oval Office in February. But still, that meeting also reinforced the question that is hanging over all of us. Is Trump committed, and to what extent is he committed to enabling Europe to stay united on Ukraine?
And finally, back to Israel's indefensible ground invasion of Gaza City. Thousands more Palestinians have been forced from their homes yet again, and the journalists amongst them have been documenting the story, some on social media, about how dystopian this moment is to be expelled from your home while under fire from airstrikes, gunfire, and drones. But there are also some journalists who say they refuse to leave.
شمال غزة لن أغادره لن أكون عونا لجيش الاحتلال في تهجير أهلي وناسي.
For those journalists, there is no safe place to go. The choice comes down to displacement or death. And yet some remain, the last remaining eyes and ears on this genocide. And their own stories will outlive them and outlive the genocidal acts that Israel is inflicting on Palestinians.